Hey guys, tonight we're not just going on a historical journey, we're taking a deep dive into the absolute nightmare that was dating in the Wild West. Imagine for a moment you're not scrolling through endless profiles on your phone swiping left or right based on carefully curated selfies. No, no, no. You're standing in a dusty, dimly lit saloon, the air thick with the scent of stale whiskey and unwashed bodies, hoping against hope that the one person who vaguely catches your eye isn't already married, doesn't have a mysterious past involving a botched bank robbery, or even worse, isn't related to you. Sounds appealing, right? You probably wouldn't survive a week, let alone find lasting love. This wasn't some romantic movie where a lone cowboy gallantly sweeps a damsel off her feet. This was hardscrabble survival, and finding a partner was often more about pragmatism than passion. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step off the dusty stagecoach, your boots sinking slightly into the sun-baked earth of a burgeoning frontier town. The air is thick with the scent of horse manure wood smoke and something vaguely metallic. Perhaps a blacksmith's forge, or maybe just the lingering aroma of desperation. This isn't the picturesque West you've seen in the dime novels with pristine white picket fences and charming general stores. No, this is raw, untamed, and frankly a bit grimy. You're here for opportunity, perhaps land, perhaps gold, perhaps just a fresh start. But deep down, like anyone, you harbor a quiet hope for connection, for companionship, for something resembling a normal life, maybe even love. Oh, how quickly that hope will be tested. Your first impression of the town is one of stark utility. Buildings are hastily constructed, mostly wood, some with canvas roofs flapping in the dry breeze. There are saloons, of course, their swinging doors offering glimpses of shadowy figures and the tinny clang of a piano. There's a general store overflowing with an eclectic mix of goods, sacks of flower tools, bolts of fabric, and a disconcerting array of patent medicines promising to cure everything from consumption to bad temper. And then there are the people. Rough-hewn, sun-weathered faces, eyes narrowed against the constant glare. Men outnumber women by a significant margin, a stark reality that immediately sets the tone for your romantic prospects. You quickly learn that the ratio of single men to single women can be as skewed as 10 to 1, sometimes even more so in boomtowns like mining camps. Imagine walking into a room where every eligible person of the opposite sex is already surrounded by a throng of desperate individuals. That's your daily reality here. You try to make sense of the social scene, if you can even call it that. Evenings are often spent in the saloon not for dancing or witty conversation, but for drinking and gambling. Women who are present are often performers or working girls or attached to a specific man. The concept of dating, as you understand it, a casual outing to get to know someone, simply doesn't exist. There are no coffee shops, no movie theaters, no romantic strolls in the park. Your interactions are limited to brief exchanges at the general store, perhaps a quick nod on the dusty street, or the strained conversation over a shared meal at a boarding house. You quickly realize that opportunities for genuine connection are as rare as a clean shirt. Even if you do manage to stumble upon someone who piques your interest, the next hurdle is monumental, the sheer logistics of courtship. Communication is primitive. There's no texting, no emails, no phone calls. If you're lucky, you might have a telegraph office in town, but that's for urgent business, not sweet nothings. Letters are slow, unreliable, and expensive. Imagine trying to build a relationship through correspondence that takes weeks, if not months, to arrive each message a leap of faith into the unknown. The notion of long-distance relationship takes on an entirely new, agonizing meaning. And if your intended lives in the next town over, that's not just a short drive, it's a grueling, potentially dangerous journey by horseback, or buggy fraught with the risk of bandits' harsh weather, or simply getting lost in the vast, unforgiving landscape. You find yourself observing the established couples, if there are any, and their interactions are utilitarian. There's a quiet understanding, a shared burden of survival, but little of the overt affection you might be accustomed to. Public displays of emotion are rare, almost frowned upon. Life is too hard, too precarious for such frivolousness. You see wives working alongside their husbands, clearing land, tending to livestock, running small businesses. Their partnership is built on necessity, on the division of labor required to simply stay afloat. This isn't to say love didn't exist, but it often had to germinate in the harsh soil of practicality. Many historians still debate whether romantic love, as we understand it today, was even a primary driver for marriage in many frontier communities, or if it was simply a happy byproduct of practical arrangements. You learn quickly that a good partner isn't necessarily someone who makes your heart flutter, but someone who can chop wood, patch a roof, and defend the homestead. And then there's the pervasive issue of hygiene. Forget designer perfumes or freshly laundered clothes. You're lucky if you have access to enough water for a weekly bath, and that water is often cold and shared. The concept of deodorant is decades away. People smell plain and simple. They smell of sweat of dust of the animals they work with, of the unwashed clothes they wear day in and day out. Imagine trying to conjure up a romantic spark when both of you are radiating the distinct aroma of hard labor and questionable sanitation. You find yourself subtly trying to gauge the wind direction when conversing a comical but necessary maneuver. This isn't some polite, subtle ode de barn. It's a full-bodied, immersive olfactory experience. The details of daily life are designed to crush any romantic notions. Your bed is likely a straw mattress, maybe a cot. Privacy is a luxury rarely afforded. You might be sharing a room or even a single room with multiple occupants. Intimacy, therefore, becomes a logistical puzzle of epic proportions. There are no quiet dinners for two, no cozy evenings by the fireplace. Your life is an open book, and everyone in the small community knows everyone else's business, which adds another layer of pressure to any budding romance. A single misstep, a whispered rumor, and your reputation could be in tatters, effectively closing off any future prospects. You learn to be discreet, almost to the point of being secretive, which further stifles any natural connection. One particularly grim reality you observe is the prevalence of lonely men, some having ventured west with dreams of striking it rich, and finding a wife only to be met with disappointment. You see them gather in saloons drinking away their meager earnings, their faces etched with loneliness and despair. Many resorted to sending away for mail-order brides, a transactional arrangement that often ended in heartbreak or worse. The concept itself is a stark reminder of the desperate imbalance, men outnumbering women to such an extent that women became commodities, advertised in newspapers and sent across vast distances, often sight unseen, to marry men they knew nothing about. It's a sobering thought, making you reconsider your romantic aspirations entirely. You hear stories whispered in hushed tones of women who try to escape unhappy marriages, or men who abandoned their families in search of something better. The law is often far away and ineffective, leaving individuals to fend for themselves in matters of the heart as much as in matters of crime. There's no easy divorce, no legal recourse for emotional distress. Once you're married for better or for worse, often until death do you part regardless of the misery. The societal pressure to marry, especially for women, was immense, as marriage often provided the only real security and stability available. You start to understand that dating wasn't about finding your soulmate, it was about finding a partner in survival, someone to share the burdens and dangers of frontier life. This understanding brings a cold dose of reality to your romantic fantasies. You've settled into the rhythm of daily life, if settled is the right word for a constant battle against the elements, and the relentless grind of frontier existence. The initial shock of the dusty, unglamorous reality of the Wild West has worn off, replaced by a grim acceptance. And with that acceptance comes an even deeper understanding of why finding a romantic partner here feels less like a grand adventure and more like an impossible scavenger hunt. The scarcity of suitors is not just a statistical anomaly, it's a palpable presence, a looming shadow over every social interaction or lack thereof. Imagine for a moment that you're living in a town of a few hundred souls, predominantly men. These aren't men who have meticulously groomed themselves for a night out. These are prospectors with dirt ingrained under their fingernails, cowboys smelling of horse and sweat farmers with sun-baked skin and calloused hands. Their priorities are survival, making a living, and perhaps a stiff drink at the end of a grueling day. Courting a woman in the modern sense simply isn't on their radar, or if it is, they have no idea how to go about it. You might observe a group of men congregating outside the general store awkwardly trying to make eye contact with a few women who pass by their attempts, often bordering on the comical or at worst the unsettling. The lack of eligible women isn't just a matter of numbers. It's a fundamental societal imbalance. Many women simply didn't venture west alone. Those who did were often traveling with families or were already married. The adventurous spirit that drew men out to the frontier was often tempered for women by the immense risks and hardships involved. For every hopeful prospector, there was barely a handful of single women. This created a highly competitive and often desperate dating pool. You find yourself subtly assessing every woman you see, not in terms of romantic interest, but in terms of availability. Is she wearing a wedding band? Is she with a husband or father? This instinctive scanning becomes second nature, born out of the sheer desperation of the situation. Think about your options. In a small town, everyone knows everyone else's business. If there's a new arrival, male or female, the news spreads faster than a prairie fire. And with that news comes intense scrutiny. If you are one of the rare single women, you quickly become the subject of intense, often overwhelming attention. It's not the kind of attention that makes you feel flattered. It's the kind that makes you feel like a prize cow at a county fair, being assessed for your utility and breeding potential. You might find yourself barraged by awkward proposals, not of romance, but of marriage sometimes, within minutes of meeting a man. These aren't grand romantic gestures. They are pragmatic propositions for a shared life of hardship. Conversely, if you are a single man, you face an equally daunting challenge. The few single women are likely to be besieged with attention, making it incredibly difficult to stand out from the crowd. And the crowd isn't a collection of well-dressed, charming gentlemen. It's a motley assortment of rough, often uneducated and desperate individuals, all vying for the same incredibly limited resource. You might find yourself trying to impress a woman by boasting about your mining claim or the number of cattle you own, or your prowess with a rifle. Not exactly the stuff of romantic poetry. The subtleties of modern courtship are completely lost in this environment. Consider the notion of meeting someone organically. Today, you might meet someone at a book club, a gym, a concert. In the Wild West, your social outlets are severely restricted. There are no organized clubs, no public events beyond an occasional town meeting or a raucous saloon brawl. Churches, if they exist, might offer a brief opportunity for polite conversation, but even there the focus is on piety, not flirtation. The only real gathering places are the general store, the saloon, or the occasional community dance, which are often crude affairs with mismatched music and even more mismatched partners. You realize that your entire social universe is confined to a tiny, isolated bubble, making the chances of encountering someone compatible, let alone available, infinitesimally small. One obscure detail that highlights this scarcity is the phenomenon of picture brides from various parts of the world, particularly from Asian countries where men on the frontier would send back photographs and receive a bride in return. This wasn't just a convenience, it was a testament to the severe imbalance of genders and the desperate need for female companionship in labor. It's a far cry from a meet cute at a coffee shop, wouldn't you agree? These women often arrived with little to no understanding of their future husbands or the harsh conditions they were entering, making their initial encounters less about romance and more about a brutal awakening. The very concept of a date is alien. There's no expectation of a man taking a woman out for dinner or to a show. Firstly, there are no shows beyond an itinerant performer or a very rare theatrical troupe. Secondly, money is often scarce and every cent is allocated to necessities. Spending precious resources on something as frivolous as a romantic outing would be seen as incredibly irresponsible, if not downright foolish. Courting, such as it was, involved visits to the woman's home, always chaperoned, usually by the entire family. Imagine trying to have a private conversation with your potential beloved, while her entire family, from her stern father to her mischievous younger siblings, are sitting in the same room hanging on every word. It's enough to stifle any romantic inclination before it even has a chance to bloom. Furthermore, the lack of privacy extends beyond chaperoned visits. In many frontier settlements, houses were small, often 1 or 2 rooms with thin walls, if any. Your neighbors were often close enough to hear every argument, every whispered word. This constant public scrutiny meant that any developing relationship was instantly fodder for gossip and speculation. There was no escaping the watchful eyes of the community, which added immense pressure to any burgeoning romance. You found yourself instinctively lowering your voice, avoiding lingering glances, and generally trying to make your interest as inconspicuous as possible, which ironically made it even harder to signal your true feelings. Even if you found someone you genuinely connected with, the question of their past, or yours, always lingered. The West was a magnet for those seeking a fresh start, running from something or someone. This meant that many individuals, both men and women, carried secrets. Perhaps a previous marriage, a criminal past, or just a reputation they were trying to outrun. Trust was a rare and valuable commodity, hard-earned and easily shattered. How do you truly get to know someone when they might be deliberately concealing a significant part of their history? The historians still debate whether the anonymity of the frontier truly offered a chance for reinvention, or if past lives inevitably caught up to individuals, shaping their romantic fates in ways they couldn't control. You become acutely aware that every seemingly casual conversation is also a subtle interrogation, a delicate dance of probing for information without appearing too suspicious. So you stand there contemplating your options. The few single women are either already spoken for or are attracting an unmanageable amount of attention. The few single men are, well, not exactly Prince Charming material, and are often just looking for a practical partner to help build a life. The concept of love at first sight feels laughably naive. Instead, you're looking for compatibility, resilience, and perhaps a shared sense of humor to get through the relentless hardships. It's a stark contrast to the romantic ideals you might have grown up with, a harsh lesson in the pragmatism of frontier existence. You've managed to survive the initial cultural shock and the crushing reality of limited choices. But now, another perhaps even more insidious aspect of Wild West dating rears its unkempt head, grooming and grit, a losing battle. Forget about your carefully chosen outfits, your expensive perfumes, or your perfectly coiffed hair. In this world, the very act of maintaining even basic hygiene is a monumental task, and looking presentable is an entirely different concept altogether. Imagine for a moment your morning routine. There's no running water, no pristine bathroom with hot and cold taps. You might have a communal pump or a well meaning every drop of water for washing. Cooking and drinking has to be hauled often for a considerable distance. Water is a precious commodity rarely wasted on something as seemingly frivolous as a daily bath. You're lucky if you manage a sponge bath once a week, and even then the water is likely cold, and the soap, if you have any, is a harsh lye-based concoction that does more to strip your skin than to moisturize it. The concept of shampoo is practically science fiction. Your hair, regardless of its original texture, quickly becomes a tangled mess laden with dust, grit, and the occasional insect. Brushing it out feels like a losing battle against the forces of nature. And then there's the constant pervasive dust. It infiltrates everything: your clothes, your skin, your hair, even your teeth. The towns are often built on dry, unpaved earth, and every gust of wind, every passing wagon, kicks up clouds of fine, particulate matter that settles everywhere. You might try to brush it off, but it's a Sisyphean task. You're constantly covered in a fine layer of grime, a perpetual coating that defies all efforts to feel truly clean. This isn't just an aesthetic inconvenience. It's a sensory assault that wears you down, making you feel perpetually unkempt and uncomfortable. Now, consider your clothes. There's no quick trip to the dry cleaner, no washing machine and dryer. Laundry is a laborious all-day affair involving boiling water over an open fire, scrubbing clothes on a washboard, and then hanging them out to dry only for them to immediately collect more dust. Because of the sheer effort involved, clothes are washed infrequently, often only when absolutely necessary. This means most people are wearing garments that are soiled, stained, and probably a bit smelly. And speaking of smells, remember the lack of deodorant. Your natural body odor combined with sweat dust and the lingering scent of whatever work you do, be it cooking, farming, or tending to animals, creates a unique, potent personal aroma. This isn't the subtle, musky scent of a well-worn leather jacket. It's a full-bodied bouquet of frontier life. Dental hygiene. A luxury if it even existed. Toothbrushes were rare and toothpaste was practically unheard of. People might use a chewed stick or a bit of rough cloth to clean their teeth, but cavities, gum disease, and missing teeth were rampant. Imagine trying to engage in charming conversation when your breath is less than fresh, and your smile is a testament to years of neglect. The absence of modern dentistry meant that dental pain was a common, agonizing reality, further detracting from any romantic appeal. You become acutely aware of the state of your own teeth and those of potential suitors with a level of detail you never thought you'd possess. One fascinating, if somewhat revolting, historical detail that underscores the desperate measures taken to freshen up is the occasional use of urine as a cleaning agent, particularly for clothes due to its ammonia content. While not widespread for personal grooming, it serves as a stark reminder of the limited resources available. And if you think that sounds unappealing, consider the prevalence of diseases caused by poor sanitation, which further impacted people's health and appearance. Pale, sickly complexions and eyes dulled by illness were far more common than rosy cheeks and sparkling eyes. The concept of fashion, too, is almost non-existent. Clothes are practical, durable, and designed for function, not style. Women wear long, heavy dresses that are difficult to keep clean, and even harder to move in, especially when performing daily chores. Men wear sturdy trousers, flannel shirts, and practical coats. There's little room for personal expression, no opportunity to dress to impress. Your attire is a uniform of survival, a testament to the harsh realities of your environment. You quickly realize that trying to look fashionable is not only futile, but also potentially dangerous, as fine clothes would mark you as an outsider, or worse, someone with something valuable to steal. And let's not forget the sheer physical toll of frontier life. Hard labor, inadequate nutrition, and constant exposure to the elements meant that people aged quickly. A woman in her late 20s might look 50 by modern standards, her skin prematurely weathered, her hands calloused, her body worn from childbearing and relentless chores. Men often fared no better, their faces lined their bodies, stooped from manual labor. This isn't a world of youthful beauty. It's a world where resilience and strength are the most valued attributes, often at the expense of physical attractiveness. So when you consider meeting a potential suitor, you're not evaluating them based on their dazzling smile or their fresh scent. You're looking at their practicality, their ability to work their resilience in the face of hardship. Can they build a fence? Can they shoot straight? Do they have a steady hand? These are the real questions, the unspoken criteria that define attractiveness in the Wild West. The idea of a romantic evening out gazing into each other's eyes over a candlelit dinner is a distant, impossible dream, replaced by the reality of sharing a meager meal in a drafty cabin, both of you smelling faintly of dust and desperation. Historians still debate whether the lack of external superficiality fostered deeper connections in these relationships, or simply made them more pragmatic and less emotionally driven. One thing is certain, though, you quickly learn that true beauty here lies not in a perfectly sculpted facade, but in a strong will and a sturdy pair of hands. You've come to terms with the dusty reality of your appearance and the overwhelming lack of options. Now you face another fundamental truth of the Wild West: your social circle's smaller than you think. Forget sprawling networks of friends, endless social events, or even the casual anonymity of a bustling city. Here, your world shrinks to a remarkably confined space, and with it, your chances of meeting someone new plummet dramatically. Imagine your entire social universe consisting of perhaps a few dozen or at most a few hundred people. These are the faces you see day in and day out: the grizzled proprietor of the general store, the gruff blacksmith, the quiet woman who runs the boarding house, and the handful of other settlers carving out a living. There's no constant influx of new people, no easy way to expand your acquaintances. New arrivals are rare, and when they do appear, they are scrutinized with an intensity that can be unnerving. You quickly realize that if you haven't met someone in your immediate vicinity, you're unlikely to meet them at all. This isn't just about the size of the town, it's about the very nature of frontier life. People are often isolated by miles of unforgiving terrain. Homesteads are spread out, and travel between them is a significant undertaking, often requiring a full day's journey by horse or wagon, fraught with dangers like harsh weather, wild animals, or even bandits. The idea of spontaneously visiting a neighbor for a chat, let alone a romantic encounter, is often impossible. Your social interactions are dictated by necessity, trading goods, attending to community needs, or seeking assistance in times of crisis. Casual socializing, the kind that naturally leads to romantic connections, is a luxury few can afford. Consider the concept of third places, those informal public spaces where people gather and interact beyond home and work. In modern society, these are parks, cafes, libraries, community centers. In the Wild West, such places are practically non existent. The saloon might serve as a gathering spot, but its atmosphere is typically male dominated, boisterous, and often volatile, hardly conducive to quiet conversation or romantic overtures. Churches, if available, offer a semblance of community, but their purpose is spiritual, not social. You quickly find that your social life revolves almost entirely around your immediate work, and survival needs leaving little room for spontaneous encounters or expanding your personal network. And even within these limited circles, established relationships are often cemented. Families stick together, and community bonds are forged out of mutual reliance in a harsh environment. If you're single, you're an anomaly and often viewed with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. A single woman might be seen as vulnerable or worse as someone with a questionable past. A single man might be seen as a restless drifter, unreliable, and not rooted in the community. This unspoken judgment further restricts your ability to form new connections, as people are wary of outsiders or those who don't fit the established mold. One surprising yet understandable historical detail is the emphasis on family ties and intermarriage within small frontier communities. With so few options, it wasn't uncommon for cousins to marry or for families to exchange spouses over generations simply because there was no one else. This wasn't necessarily out of strong romantic feeling, but out of a pragmatic need to maintain land, consolidate resources, and simply continue the family line. While not the norm everywhere, it illustrates the desperate measures born from limited social circles. It makes you realize that your dating pool isn't just small, it might be incestuously small. Furthermore, the lack of widespread literacy and formal education means that intellectual pursuits, which often form the basis of shared interests in modern relationships, are rare. Conversations tend to be practical about crops, weather, livestock, or the latest news from the nearest town. There's little room for discussions on philosophy, literature, or art unless you happen upon one of the rare, educated individuals. You quickly learn to adjust your expectations for conversation, focusing on shared experiences of hardship rather than common intellectual ground. This makes finding someone with whom you share a genuine mental connection incredibly challenging. The frontier also has a transient nature. People are constantly moving, seeking better opportunities or fleeing difficult situations. This constant flux means that even if you do form a connection, there's always the underlying fear that your newfound companion might pick up stakes and leave tomorrow. Building a lasting relationship requires stability, and stability is a rare commodity in this restless world. You learn to be wary of investing too much emotionally, knowing that any connection you forge might be fleeting, a temporary solace in a vast, lonely landscape. So your social life isn't a bustling tapestry of diverse interactions. It's a tight-knit, often suffocating circle of familiar faces. The opportunities to meet someone new are almost non-existent, and the pressure to conform to existing community norms is immense. The Wild West, far from being a place of boundless freedom, often imposes its own rigid social constraints, making the pursuit of genuine romantic connection a solitary and disheartening endeavor. Historians still debate whether the close-knit nature of these communities fostered stronger bonds out of necessity, or if it simply amplified existing tensions and made personal privacy an impossible dream. What you know for sure is that you're constantly aware of every eye, every whisper, every judgment, further narrowing the path to a shared future. You've navigated the social minefield of tiny towns and limited options, and somehow, against all odds, you've managed to spark a flicker of interest with someone. But don't uncork the imaginary champagne just yet. Now comes the truly terrifying part: the perilous pursuit of love. Getting to your beloved, or even just meeting them for a supervised courtship visit, is not a simple drive down the road. It's an odyssey fraught with genuine dangers that would make your modern-day road rage seem like a quaint inconvenience. Imagine your love interest lives on a homestead 10 miles outside of town. 10 miles. In today's world, that's a 15-minute drive. In the Wild West, it's a half-day's journey by horseback, or an even longer, bumpier, and more exhausting trek by wagon. And this isn't a paved road. It's a barely discernible track, often just a pair of ruts carved into the prairie, or winding precariously through rocky terrain. You're not just contending with dust and heat, you're dealing with the very real possibility of getting lost. There are no road signs, no GPS, just a vague sense of direction, and perhaps a few landmarks like a particularly gnarled tree or a strangely shaped rock formation. A wrong turn could mean hours of backtracking, or worse, getting completely disoriented in the vast, empty landscape. And then there are the elements. The weather in the Wild West isn't just bad, it's actively hostile. A sudden prairie thunderstorm can erupt without warning, turning dry creek beds into raging rivers and transforming dusty trails into impassable quagmires. A blizzard can descend in minutes, bringing blinding snow and freezing temperatures capable of killing you or your horse within hours. Even seemingly benign conditions like a strong wind can kick up dust storms that reduce visibility to zero and strip the skin from your face. You learn to read the sky with an almost instinctual urgency because a miscalculation could mean the end of your romantic overture or even your life. But the biggest threat perhaps isn't nature but other humans. The Wild West, remember, was often a lawless land. Bandits, desperados, and outlaws roamed the trails preying on travelers. A lone rider or a couple in a buggy presented an easy target. You'd have to ride armed, constantly scanning the horizon, your hand hovering near your sidearm ready for trouble. Every shadow could conceal a lurking threat, every distant dust cloud could signal approaching danger. This isn't the kind of stress you want to experience on your way to a first date. Imagine trying to make witty conversation when you're acutely aware that you might have to draw your pistol at any moment. One fascinating, if grim, historical reality is the prevalence of stagecoach robberies and ambushes. Even if you were traveling with others, the risk was significant. These weren't just stories, they were very real threats that shaped daily life and travel. People often wrote wills before embarking on long journeys, a stark indicator of the perceived danger. So, while you're dreaming of a future with your potential beloved, you're simultaneously calculating the odds of encountering a gang of armed men intent on relieving you of your meager possessions or worse. And then there's the wildlife. Rattlesnakes coiled in the shade of rocks. Cougars stalking silently through the brush, and bears, though rarer, were still a formidable threat. Your horse, your primary mode of transportation, was also vulnerable. A lame horse or one spooked by a sudden noise could leave you stranded miles from anywhere, a terrifying prospect in a world without cell phones or emergency services. Every creak of your saddle, every rustle in the bushes puts you on edge, making the journey less about anticipation and more about survival. Even if you manage to arrive safely, the date itself would be far from glamorous. You might share a simple meal, perhaps dried jerky and hardtack in a dimly lit cabin. Entertainment would be limited to quiet conversation, maybe a worn deck of cards, or the soft strumming of a banjo if someone was musical. The idea of a romantic dinner at a fancy restaurant or a night at the opera is so far removed from this reality that it's almost laughable. Your date is often more about demonstrating your resilience, your practicality, and your ability to endure hardship together. It's a test of whether you can survive as a team, not whether you can make each other laugh over expensive wine. The concept of a meet cute in this environment is almost impossible. Any meeting is usually driven by necessity or sheer coincidence, rarely by deliberate romantic planning. You don't run into people at the local coffee shop. You might run into them at the watering hole or at the general store when you're both picking up supplies covered in dust and sweat. The opportunity for a grand romantic gesture is virtually non-existent. Instead, courtship is a series of small, often awkward interactions, punctuated by long, dangerous journeys. The historians still debate whether the shared adversity of these journeys, however perilous, might have actually forged deeper, more resilient bonds between couples than modern, easier courtships. You, however, are just thankful to arrive in one piece. You've somehow survived the perilous journey to see your potential sweetheart, perhaps even dodging a bandit or two. Congratulations! But now, as you settle into the reality of a frontier relationship, another insidious truth becomes painfully clear. Money matters, poverty's passion killers. Forget grand gestures, romantic gifts, or even a simple night out. In the Wild West, a lack of financial stability doesn't just make dating difficult, It often makes it utterly impossible, suffocating any spark of romance before it has a chance to ignite. Imagine the average person's financial situation. You're likely living hand to mouth your entire existence, dictated by the success of a meager crop, the fluctuating price of gold, or the demand for your labor. Every cent earned is immediately allocated to basic necessities: food, shelter, rudimentary clothing, and perhaps a few vital tools. There's no disposable income for luxuries, and in this environment, even simple comforts are considered extravagant. The concept of saving for a rainy day is often just a pipe dream. Most days are rainy, metaphorically speaking. So how do you court someone when you can barely afford to feed yourself? There's no treating someone to dinner at a fancy establishment because there are no fancy establishments. And even if there were, you wouldn't have the funds. The idea of buying flowers or chocolates is absurd. Such items are either non-existent or prohibitively expensive, imported from thousands of miles away. Your romantic gestures are limited to acts of service, helping with chores, sharing a rare commodity like a piece of fruit, or simply offering companionship during a long, lonely evening. While these gestures certainly have their own value, they often lack the traditional romantic allure. Consider the practical implications for marriage. A man proposing to a woman isn't just asking for her hand. He's asking her to join him in a life of often brutal economic struggle. He needs to demonstrate that he can provide for a family no matter how meagerly. This means having a homestead, some livestock, or a stable job, however low paying. For many, simply accumulating enough resources to build a small cabin or buy a few acres of land could take years of backbreaking labor and extreme frugality. The pressure to prove one's financial viability, even at a subsistence level, weighed heavily on every potential suitor. One stark, often overlooked historical detail is the practice of dower rights, which in some areas allowed a widow to inherit a portion of her deceased husband's property, often one-third. While this offered some security, it also subtly influenced marriage decisions, as women or their families might look for partners with established property, adding another layer of pragmatism to marital choices. It wasn't just about love, it was about ensuring a degree of financial security in a world where destitution was a constant threat. You realize that your value in this economic landscape is often measured by your assets, not your affections. For women, the economic realities were equally, if not more, crushing. Marriage was often the only viable path to economic security and social standing. Single women, unless they owned land or had a rare skill, faced immense hardship and limited opportunities for independence. They might work as laundresses, cooks, or teachers, but these jobs were low-paying and offered little long-term stability. The pressure to marry for financial reasons rather than for love was immense. You might observe women making pragmatic choices, marrying men significantly older or less appealing, simply because those men offered a chance at survival and a roof over their heads. Debt was a constant shadow. Many settlers started with nothing, borrowing against future harvests or the elusive promise of gold. A single bad season, a failed claim, or an unexpected illness could plunge a family into irreparable debt, leading to foreclosures, forced relocations, or even destitution. How do you plan a future with someone when the present is so precarious and the threat of financial ruin looms constantly? The weight of economic insecurity could crush any budding romance, making long-term commitments seem like an impossible gamble. And then there's the psychological toll. The constant worry about money, the relentless grind of labor, and the ever-present threat of poverty creates a pervasive sense of stress and anxiety. This mental burden leaves little room for the lighter, more joyful aspects of courtship. Laughter might be rare, smiles fleeting. Passion, when it existed, often had to contend with the gnawing fear of starvation or homelessness. The ability to simply relax and enjoy someone's company was a luxury few could afford, emotionally or financially. Historians still debate the true impact of this relentless financial struggle on the emotional landscape of frontier relationships, questioning whether it fostered stronger, more resilient partnerships built on shared adversity, or if it simply drained all the joy and spontaneity from them. What you know is that every interaction is colored by this unspoken economic reality. So your dreams of a whirlwind romance are quickly replaced by the somber calculations of survival. Can he provide? Can she manage a household? Do we have enough to simply exist? These are the questions that define courtship in the Wild West, stripping away the romance and exposing the stark, pragmatic heart of frontier relationships. It's a sobering realization that love in this world is often a secondary concern to the pressing, all-consuming need for basic economic survival. You've grappled with the economics of love or the lack thereof in the Wild West. Now prepare to confront another immovable obstacle: gender roles, unyielding expectations. Forget any notion of fluid identities or shared responsibilities. Here, your gender is not just a biological fact. It is a rigid blueprint for your entire life, dictating your opportunities, your behavior, and most critically, your romantic prospects. These roles aren't just societal norms. They are survival mechanisms ingrained in the very fabric of frontier existence, leaving little room for deviation or personal preference. Imagine being a woman in the Wild West. Your primary role almost universally is domestic. You are expected to be a wife, a mother, and a tireless homemaker. Your days are filled with relentless chores: hauling water, chopping wood, cooking over an open fire, sewing clothes, cleaning a perpetually dusty cabin, and tending to children. There's no escaping these responsibilities. They are vital to the family's survival. Your value is largely tied to your ability to perform these tasks efficiently and without complaint. A woman who is seen as lazy or incapable in domestic matters would be considered a poor marriage prospect, regardless of any other qualities she might possess. You might be fiercely independent, but if you can't bake a decent biscuit or darn a sock, your romantic future is bleak. Conversely, as a man, your role is equally defined: provider and protector. You are expected to be physically strong, capable of working the land hunting building, and defending your homestead from threats both human and natural. Your worth is measured by your ability to bring in resources, maintain security, and make tough decisions. Emotional expression, vulnerability, or any deviation from this stoic, self-reliant archetype is often viewed with suspicion or even contempt. A man who shows too much emotion or who isn't seen as capable of providing would be considered a weak link and undesirable partner in a world that demands resilience. You might possess a poetic soul, but if you can't swing an axe, you're not likely to impress. These rigid roles permeate every aspect of courtship. When a man approaches a woman, he isn't just seeking companionship, he's seeking a partner to help run a household, bear children, and share the immense labor of frontier life. Her attractiveness is often tied less to modern ideas of beauty and more to her perceived strength, her industriousness, and her ability to endure hardship. Similarly, a woman evaluating a man isn't looking for a sensitive soul. She's looking for a good provider, someone steady, reliable, and capable of protecting her and any future family. The romantic ideal of a soulmate is largely overshadowed by the practical need for a competent partner in survival. One particularly telling, if grim, historical reality is the high rate of mortality, particularly for women during childbirth. This grim statistic often meant that men remarried quickly out of necessity, not always out of deep affection. A household needed a woman to manage it, to care for children, and to perform the myriad domestic tasks. This created a pragmatic urgency in marriage that further cemented traditional gender roles. You might observe a widower still grieving, but already looking for a new wife, not out of callousness, but out of a desperate need to maintain his household and care for his existing children. Public behavior is also strictly governed by these roles. Women are expected to be modest, demure, and to uphold a strong moral reputation. Any hint of impropriety, a scandalous rumor, or a perceived transgression could ruin a woman's reputation, entirely making her unmarriageable. Men, while often given more leeway, were still expected to be honorable, hardworking, and responsible, especially if they harbored intentions of settling down. There's no room for casual flirtation or playful banter that might be misconstrued. Every interaction is carefully weighed, every gesture scrutinized, adding an immense layer of pressure to what should be a natural connection. The limited opportunities for education and personal development also reinforce these roles. Girls are typically taught domestic skills from a young age, while boys are trained in farming, hunting, or whatever trade their family pursues. There are few alternative paths. The idea of a woman pursuing a career outside the home, or a man taking on a primary caregiving role, is practically unheard of, and would likely be met with ridicule and social ostracization. This lack of choice means that individuals are often forced into roles that may not align with their personal inclinations, further stifling genuine connection based on shared passions or intellectual curiosity. So when you consider dating in the Wild West, you're not just looking for a person. You're looking for someone who fits a predefined, rigid mold. Your gender isn't just part of who you are, it's a straitjacket constraining your choices and shaping your romantic destiny. The idea of a relationship built on equal partnership and mutual interests is a foreign concept, replaced by a clear division of labor and expectations based purely on biology. Historians still debate whether these rigid roles born of necessity ultimately led to more stable, albeit less passionate marriages, or if they stifled individual happiness and created a silent resentment that simmered beneath the surface of frontier life. What you know is that defying these expectations is not just difficult, it's a direct threat to your very survival. You've endured the rigid expectations of gender roles, a silent testament to the practicality of frontier life. Now you're about to confront the harsh reality that for many in the Wild West marriage, a transaction, not love. Forget the romantic comedies and the sweeping declarations of undying affection. Here, a wedding was often less about hearts entwined and more about hands joined in a pragmatic agreement to survive, thrive, or simply subsist. Imagine the conversation, if you can even call it that. It's not whispered sweet nothings under a moonlit sky. It's a direct, almost business-like proposition. A man, if he had a homestead, some livestock, or a stable, if meager income, would essentially be offering a woman a share in his meager resources in exchange for her labor, her companionship, and her ability to bear and raise children. For a woman, accepting such a proposal often meant trading her uncertain future as a single person for the relative security and defined role within a household. There was little room for emotional frills. The transaction was transparent and understood by all. This isn't to say love never blossomed. Human connection is resilient, even in the harshest environments. But it was often a secondary consideration, a happy accident rather than the primary driver. The first questions asked were practical: can he provide? Is she hardworking? Are they healthy? These were the benchmarks for a successful union, far more important than shared interests or sparkling chemistry. You'd observe couples whose interactions were more akin to business partners discussing inventory than lovers planning a future. Their bond was forged in shared labor and mutual dependence, a sturdy practical alliance against the relentless demands of the frontier. One particularly telling, if somewhat chilling, historical detail is the phenomenon of mail-order brides. This wasn't just a quirky anecdote, it was a widespread, desperate solution to the extreme gender imbalance. Men would place advertisements in Eastern newspapers, sometimes including their physical descriptions and financial prospects, and women, often seeking escape from poverty or limited opportunities, would respond. They would exchange letters and photographs, leading to a marriage, often sight unseen upon the woman's arrival in the West. This starkly illustrates how marriage was viewed as a contractual arrangement, a practical solution to a demographic problem, rather than a romantic ideal. You quickly realize that your entire future might hinge on a few written words and a faded photograph. Consider the role of family in these arrangements. While modern relationships emphasize individual choice, frontier marriages often involved the input, if not direct negotiation, of families. A family might encourage a daughter to marry a man with a good piece of land, or a son to take a wife from a respectable, hardworking family to consolidate resources or secure alliances. Love, again, often took a back seat to the collective well-being and strategic advantage of the extended family unit. You witness subtle pressures, whispered suggestions, and unspoken expectations that guide individuals towards marriages of convenience rather than passion. Divorce, when it existed at all, was incredibly difficult, expensive, and socially stigmatizing. There were few legal avenues for dissolving a marriage, and most communities frowned upon it severely. This meant that once you entered into this transaction, you were largely stuck. This added another layer of pragmatism to the decision-making process. You weren't just choosing a partner for now, you were choosing a partner for life with very little recourse if the arrangement proved unsatisfactory. The permanence of the commitment driven by societal and legal constraints made the initial transaction even more significant. The celebrations themselves often reflected this pragmatic view. Weddings were typically simple utilitarian affairs, a brief ceremony performed by a circuit preacher, or justice of the peace followed by a modest meal, and perhaps some dancing. There were no elaborate honeymoons, no grand parties. The focus was on the solemnity of the vows and the beginning of a new shared life of labor, not on lavish displays of affection. You realize that even the joyous moments of life are stripped down to their bare essentials, reflecting the harsh realities of existence. So, as you observe the unions around you, you come to understand that marriage in the Wild West was less a culmination of romantic love and more a strategic partnership. It was about pooling resources, sharing labor, and creating a stable unit in an unstable world. While genuine affection could and did grow from these arrangements, it was often a byproduct of shared hardship and mutual reliance, rather than the initial spark. The idea of marrying for love feels like a quaint, distant dream replaced by the stark, undeniable reality that for most marriage was a necessity, a transaction, and ultimately a powerful tool for survival. Historians still debate whether this pragmatic approach to marriage led to more resilient family units in the long run, or if it simply suppressed individual desires in favor of collective survival. What you know for sure is that your heart, however hopeful, must bow to the unyielding logic of the frontier. You've navigated the transactional nature of marriage, a stark contrast to modern romantic ideals. But even if you manage to find a practical partner, you must now contend with perhaps the most pervasive and insidious problem of all, the lawless landscape of love. Forget the comfort of legal protections, established social norms, or easily accessible justice. In the Wild West, relationships unfolded in a legal vacuum, a moral gray zone where individual strength, reputation, and sheer luck often mattered. More than any written law leaving you vulnerable to a myriad of risks. Imagine a world where law enforcement is sparse, if it exists at all. A lone sheriff might cover hundreds of square miles, or a town might rely on a hastily deputized citizen with questionable authority. Courts are often distant, slow, and susceptible to local biases or outright corruption. This absence of formal structure means that disputes, even those of the heart, are often settled outside the courtroom, sometimes with devastating consequences. If someone wrongs you in a romantic entanglement, whether it's abandonment, infidelity, or something far worse, your avenues for recourse are incredibly limited. There's no legal aid, no easily accessible divorce, no restraining orders. You are largely on your own. Consider the concept of reputation. In small, isolated communities, reputation was everything. For a woman, a damaged reputation, however unfairly earned, could make her an outcast, unmarriageable, and economically vulnerable. Rumors once started spread like wildfire and were nearly impossible to extinguish. A man might suffer less from a tarnished reputation, but it could still impact his business dealings or his ability to find a respectable wife. This intense social scrutiny, coupled with the lack of legal protection, meant that individuals often policed themselves not out of inherent morality but out of fear of social ruin. One chilling, though perhaps not widely known, historical detail that underscores this lawlessness is the prevalence of informal duels or acts of frontier justice to settle personal grievances, including those stemming from romantic rivalries. While not formal duels in the European sense, arguments over a woman could quickly escalate into gunfights or violent altercations with little to no legal repercussion for the victor, especially if self-defense could be argued. This meant that a romantic entanglement could literally be a matter of life and death, forcing individuals to be constantly vigilant and prepared to defend their honor or their partners with force. You realize that your personal safety is intricately tied to the whims and tempers of others, and that a broken heart might just be the least of your worries. Infidelity, while universally frowned upon, often went unpunished by law. A betrayed spouse might seek satisfaction through violence rather than legal channels. Cases of vengeful husbands or wronged lovers taking matters into their own hands were not uncommon, further highlighting the dangerous lack of formal legal infrastructure. You'd hear whispers of such incidents reinforcing the understanding that in this landscape, personal honor and retribution often superseded any formal justice system. The movement of people also contributed to this lawless environment. The West was a magnet for those seeking to escape their pasts, whether it was debt, a broken marriage, or criminal activity. This meant that many individuals operated under assumed names or vague histories, making it incredibly difficult to ascertain someone's true character or marital status. You might fall for someone only to discover they have a wife and children back east with no easy way to confirm their story or hold them accountable. The lack of reliable records identification or communication meant that deception was rampant, and trust was a rare commodity hard earned and easily shattered. Furthermore, issues of consent and exploitation were often poorly understood or completely ignored. Vulnerable individuals, particularly women, were susceptible to coercion, deception, and abuse with little hope for protection from the law. The power imbalance was often stark, and without a robust legal system, those with power often acted with impunity. This created a perilous environment where entering into a relationship carried inherent risks that extended far beyond emotional heartbreak. So, as you navigate the treacherous waters of love in the Wild West, you realize that every step is a gamble. There's no safety net, no easily accessible recourse for injustice. Your relationships are built on trust, yes, but also on a constant awareness of the potential for betrayal, violence, and the utter lack of formal protection. The romantic ideal of a supportive legal framework, which you might take for granted, simply doesn't exist here. Historians still debate whether this extreme self-reliance and the absence of formal laws fostered a unique, albeit dangerous, sense of individual freedom in relationships, or if it simply led to more widespread exploitation and suffering. What you know is that every romantic choice you make is a high-stakes gamble in a land where justice often wears a six-shooter. You've faced down the lack of legal recourse, the social scrutiny, and the constant threat of danger in your quest for connection. Now, as the sun begins to set on your Wild West romantic escapade, you find yourself contemplating the final crushing blow, escaping the echoes of emptiness. After all the hardship, the scarcity, the grit, and the danger, the lingering question remains, is genuine, fulfilling love even possible here? Or are you doomed to a life defined by loneliness and pragmatic arrangements? Imagine the quiet desperation that settles in after a long day. The sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, but there's no one to share the beauty with. The sounds of the day, the creak of wagons, the distant lowing of cattle, the chatter from the saloon fade into the vast, echoing silence of the prairie. You're alone in your small cabin, perhaps with a flickering lantern for light, and the immense weight of solitude presses down on you. This isn't a fleeting moment of peace. It's the pervasive backdrop to existence, a constant reminder of the emotional isolation that defines so much of frontier life. You might try to fill the void. Perhaps you throw yourself into your work, working longer hours, pushing your physical limits, hoping exhaustion will numb the ache of loneliness. Or you might seek solace in the saloon, a temporary escape in the bottom of a whiskey glass amidst the boisterous yet ultimately shallow camaraderie of other weary souls. But these are fleeting distractions, mere attempts to outrun the gnawing emptiness that creeps in when the noise dies down and the work is done. The laughter feels hollow, the warmth of the fire temporary. The dream of a family of children, of a shared future, often remains just that, a dream. For many, the relentless struggle for survival left little room for the cultivation of deep, loving bonds. Relationships often formed out of necessity, endured out of resilience, but rarely flourished in the rich emotional soil that modern society often takes for granted. You might see couples who share a roof and chores, but whose eyes betray a profound weariness, a quiet acceptance of a life less than fully lived emotionally speaking. One lesser known yet incredibly poignant historical detail is the sheer volume of personal letters and diaries from the period that express profound loneliness and homesickness. These aren't the adventurous tales of daring deeds, but quiet, heartfelt lamentations about the absence of family, friends, and intimate companionship. Many individuals, both men and women, carried this emotional burden in silence, putting on a brave face for the world while yearning for connection. You realize that beneath the rough exterior of every frontiersman and pioneer woman, there was often a heart aching for something more, something akin to the tender affection you've always yearned for. Even if you managed to find someone, the challenges didn't end at the altar. The constant threat of death from disease, accident, or violence meant that even stable relationships could be abruptly shattered. Widows and widowers were common, often left to pick up the pieces alone, further perpetuating the cycle of loneliness and loss. The emotional cost of loving someone in such a precarious world was immense, making many hesitant to open their hearts, fully knowing how quickly joy could turn to sorrow. So you stand at a crossroads. Do you continue to search to hope for a love that seems almost mythical in this harsh land? Or do you adjust your expectations, settle for a pragmatic partnership, and find solace in the shared struggle for survival? The echoes of emptiness are always there, a subtle hum beneath the surface of daily life, a reminder of the emotional toll that the Wild West exacts. The idealized romance of the dime novels fades completely, replaced by a profound understanding of the compromises and sacrifices required just to endure. Historians still grapple with the psychological impact of this pervasive loneliness on the character and resilience of frontier people, questioning how much emotional repression was a necessary survival tool. For you, the answer is clear. Escaping the echoes of emptiness is less about finding a person and more about finding a way to survive the crushing silence of your own heart.